Welcome, distinguished speakers, guests, and friends. Namaste, Assalamu alaikum, and warm greetings to all of you. Happy Father's Day, especially to those who have joined us today and to all around the world. I am Ashley Sinanan of Trinidad and Tobago, an independent researcher specializing in historical studies. I hold a bachelor's degree in history with a minor in literature from the University of the West Indies. This is the 317th edition of our ICC Thought Leaders Forum. We wish to sincerely thank all of you who have graciously contributed to the success of this ongoing Pan-Indo-Caribbean and Pan-Indian Diaspora Global Project. For 316 unbroken continuous weeks, we have been here every single Sunday. In the past 5 years and 8 months and 3 weeks, we have featured 1,262 presenters speaking on 316 topics. We are pleased to have speakers and participants in this meeting from all parts of the world in different time zones. This weekly forum is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, a legally registered research and publishing company operating since 2010. In order to continue this weekly program, we are asking for suggestions and volunteers. If you choose to give a donation, Dr. Mahabir should be contacted to provide details and will ensure that your name will be placed on our poster and all promotional materials. Ladies and gentlemen, today I am pleased to introduce our moderator, who is Shalima Mohammed, who is also the co-director of this ICC Zoom platform. She is a cultural and heritage consultant, business psychologist, teacher, and researcher from right here in Trinidad and Tobago. Shalima, welcome.
Thanks so much, Ashley. Nice to have you with us again. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Namaste and a warm welcome to all of you here in the Zoom room, as well as those of you viewing the live stream on the YouTube channel of the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. Thanks so much for choosing to be here with us. As we begin, we acknowledge a unique confluence of milestones this June. Firstly, happy Father's Day to the fathers with us today. We also mark International Day of Yoga, and so we will share a celebratory video at the close of our program. Additionally, we extend a warm Hijri Mubarak to our Muslim brothers and sisters on the new Islamic year 1448. This month also carries profound historical weight. You see, 50 years ago, on June 16, 1976, South Africans rose up against systemic educational repression. While history rightfully remembers the Soweto uprising, the Apartheid regime also weaponized education against Indo-South Africans. Through the Indians Education Act of 1965 and segregated universities, the state tried to restrict an entire community to subordinate routes. Yet these campuses backfired, transforming into hotbeds of resistance where Indo-South African students aligned with the Black consciousness movement to subvert the system. This complex history is precisely why today's panel discussion is so vital. It forces us to look beyond the surface of history and confront three critical questions. Firstly, how did minority communities navigate and resist the specialized legislative traps designed to limit their intellect? Secondly, in what ways did segregated spaces unintentionally foster deep, cross-racial solidarity against a common oppressor? And thirdly, how does the legacy of this institutional repression continue to shape educational equity and identity today? To help us unpack these profound questions, let us please welcome our panel. And firstly, we'll have Mr. Naren Ganesh, whose sharing of information was the impetus for today's topic. Naren is a political and community leader in South Africa, actively involved in addressing many relevant issues with authorities and matters affecting local and national communities. We're very happy to have you as always. Welcome.
Thank you, Shalima, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the international audience.
Thank you. Can we have your presentation up? I think Nabin will arrange that for you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a very interesting topic that has been brought about because it it's a relevant topic, not only in South Africa, but I guess worldwide. And firstly, I'd like to bring you fraternal greetings from the Republic of South Africa. And the topic for discussion today is a very important one because for me, education is primarily a universal weapon that can never be destroyed, no matter where we are in the world. It is a lesson that I've been taught by my dad from very early on, that it is the only weapon that can take us to the seas and beyond. And it has become so true. Now, educational repression in South Africa persists today through systemic inequities, crumbling infrastructure and severe resource disparities, disproportionately affecting primarily Black and rural students. And I will emphasize a little later on why this is the case, because it is as a result of our apartheid system that we had until 1994. Now, while access to schooling has expanded, the legacy of apartheid, which is euphemistically called separate development, left many young people trapped in underfunded environments where overcrowded classrooms and poor learning outcomes to this day still remain as severe barriers to opportunity. Uh, and at this point, I'd like to illustrate or state that although the struggle for equal education began as a fight against state-enforced, racially restrictive Bantu education, and this was in about 1953, the nature of educational deprivation has shifted in the democratic era, in the new democratic era, should I say. And the key issues that activists, legal organizations, and researchers continue to combat would include, and this is important to note, firstly, the resource disparities. And here it must be noted that the wealthy, formerly what was known as Model C schools in South Africa, remain well funded and highly resourced, while township and rural schools suffer from a lack of basic facilities, running water, importantly, and adequate training, especially of some of the teachers that have been posted in those areas. The second important point is overcrowded classrooms. Now, this is a major problem in South Africa because, especially in the rural areas, which drains valuable teaching time. It forces teachers to focus excessively on classroom management, and this consequently depresses the student academic performance. And three is what I call systemic roadblocks. There are some rigid admission policies and zoning laws which have been created, which often effectively exclude poorer students from accessing quality education in the more affluent neighborhoods. And look, there can be no argument that the policy of apartheid has its effects to this day, whether we like it or not, even though there has been a radical approach in terms of the delivery of education. But the 16th of June, 1976, was a turning point in the radicalization of students of color to stand up against a regime hell-bent on foisting down a system of education upon the masses that was wholly unacceptable. Now, while South Africa has made significant strides in expanding education since 1976, many of the equalities that motivated the so-called Soweto uprising continue to affect the young people of today. June 16th, which is a public holiday in South Africa known as Youth Day, both commemorates and celebrates the resilience, the determination, and the courage of a generation of children who did not yield to their masters of that day and rose up as one in what was known as the struggle. And what started as a ripple undercurrent of dissatisfaction actually ended up as the unleashing of a tidal wave of resistance. I will at this point refer to the IT, Mr. Naveen, to play three videos that depict the horrific violence meted out by the apartheid regime against protesting students during those days of apartheid. Now, these are very brief clips, but they depict the actual violence that was unleashed against the defenseless children of the day, especially in June 16th. If I may ask if the three videos could be played, please.
On June 16, 1976, the streets of Soweto became the stage for one of the most defining moments in South Africa's history. Hundreds of young people left their classrooms and walked into the streets to protest against the forced use of Afrikaans as a language of instruction. They carried a conviction far greater than their years and refused to accept a future shaped by oppression and inequality. They walked the streets of Soweto directly into a path of a brutal system determined to silence them.
The first time I see so many people being killed, innocent young people. And what is said is that not any of those young kids carried a firearm or a grenade or whatever. No.
Lots of lives were lost. Lots of lives were lost. And that pains me, and it still pains me to this day.
It angered the Boers up until they released a dog to disperse the crowd. You know what happened? He had a knife in the pocket. He stabbed that dog to death. That's what triggered the shooting in 1976.
Thank you very much.
I was in Orlando West and I saw these police vehicles going towards Orlando West High School, which is where I went to school. Hundreds, from thousands of students.
This was actually basically a peaceful protest until they started shooting. It was David and Goliath.
Thank you.
First is a illegal government.
Thank you very much. You know, looking at it now, and every time I look at those little clips, the hairs on my hands stand up. Now, while we were little children at the time and we were not directly involved, it evokes a very strong emotion in us because fellow compatriots had sacrificed their lives for us. And, you know, without going into much detail of the day, the morning of June 16th, 1976 was the beginning of a redefinition of a South African nation. The thousands of students from the township of Soweto. Now, Soweto was named with the prefixes of Southwestern Township. So the first two words, South, S-O, Western, W-E, and Township, T-O. That's how the name Soweto was derived. Started a march from the Orlando Stadium, protesting the compulsory teaching of the subject Afrikaans, considered the language of the oppressor. Today, Afrikaans is one of the official languages of South Africa, we having 11. And but back in the day, it represented the oppressor, and that was the apartheid regime. And it was made compulsory that students of the time pass the exams. The basic premise of education to Black children at the time was deliberately engineered, not merely for inequality, but not for inequality, but for subjugation. And the Black children were subjected to be schooled just enough to serve, never enough to lead. And I think that was the crux of what the apartheid regime meant to the students of the day. As the march began from the Orlando Stadium, and before the children could reach their destination, they were planning to go to the Department of Education at the time, Bantu Education, to present their grievances. They were met with heavy armed police, and the force of that police units were devastating. And they responded with tear gas and live ammunition, and that's what resulted in so many deaths of children. The following picture is a poignant and historic photograph that epitomizes the 16th of June 1976 and has had worldwide audiences remember what transpired. It is the picture of a young lad, 12-year-old lad called Hector Peterson, who was considered to be one of the first students shot and killed in 1976. And I think the picture might have gone to people in the audience across the world, but to us it reminds us of what June 16 was. And if I could just ask the picture to be played, please. Okay, thank you. Now, the iconic picture shows a heavily wounded Hector Peterson being carried in the arms of his friend and in search of help, I would assume at the time. And thus, the beginning of widespread unrest and rioting started throughout South Africa. Today, and as a result of that fateful day, the right to fair and basic and equal education is enshrined as a fundamental right in terms of Section 29 of our national constitution, ensuring that no child may be denied this right because of their race or background. But the question we ask is, 50 years on, did we deliver on the promise? A plethora of factors, some I've already mentioned, does not aid in an affirmative answer. Other socioeconomic factors such as poverty, lack of reliable transport, food insecurity, and child-headed households further hinder children's ability to perform well at schools. I believe the true test of our democratic process made after 1976 is not whether education has become more accessible for some, but whether it can provide dignity, opportunity, and inclusion for all children who walk through school gates. And while South Africa has made strides expanding access to education since 1976, many of the inequalities that motivated the Soweto uprising continue to affect the young people of today. As South Africans reflect on 50 years since the uprising, it is evident that the struggle has evolved rather than ended. And the children of 1976 sacrificed their lives so that education could be a ladder, not a cage. 50 years on, the ladder exists, but for too many young South Africans, it is missing rungs. Honoring them is not lighting candles at the Hector Peterson Memorial. It is demanding that a child in a rural school in KwaZulu-Natal or Mitchell's Plain in the Cape gets the same fighting chance as one from either Sandton or Camps Bay. The areas I've reflected are dichotomous in terms of the socioeconomic class. 50 years after the class of 76 changed the course of South African history with nothing but their school shoes and their blood and conviction, the least I think we owe them is honesty to look at what remains undone and resolve to do it, to finish what was started. It is important to note that there were levels of privilege meted out to other race groups in the 1980s. We had a tricameral parliament that was instituted by the Apartheid government. Indians were being offered a tier of government known as the House of Delegates, and the colored community, the House of Representatives, and with the whites controlling it through the House of Assembly. But the black communities were relegated to homelands, euphemistically called Bantustans. This in itself lent impetus to increase the struggle movement in South Africa, especially in the educational field. However, the House of Delegates ensured that if it delivered quality education to the Indian student, Despite many strains and stresses, lack of finances and resources being of particular concern, they could uplift the lives of the Indian community. Today, many Indo-South Africans have excelled in the fields of medicine, agriculture, commerce, education, business, arts, and much, much more, and have also distinguished themselves on the global theater of academia. And from the ashes of slavery and indenture, and I think this is perhaps our hallmark, the Indo-South African has risen like the proverbial phoenix from the ashes in every field of human endeavor to stamp his mark on South African life, and is a very integral and contributory citizen of the country. But what was important was the fact that students all over the country always use June 16th as a pivotal date to remind themselves of the burden they carry. And I recall in my school days, we ensured a day of protest and observance, albeit that the authorities that such protests were directed at did not bother to bat an eyelid or cared. And sadly, we also carry the flame of 1976, not as much with pain because we are still living, but to remember those who had sacrificed for us. 27th April 1994 turned the tide. It flipped the leaf, as it were, and heralded a new era of a constitutional democracy, ensuring equality, fairness, and freedom, or so it seemed. But my view is that the rush to normalize and level the playing fields, as it were, is one of the main reasons we find education floundering as it seems today. Many things have changed, as I mentioned initially, the challenges. I remember in the late 90s, after the advent of democracy, I had a heated exchange with the late and then Minister of Education, Dr. Khalid Rasmal, when he introduced a system called the OBE into our national schooling system, the outcomes-based education. And having researched it previously, there was going to be a failure of that program, but he insisted it was going to fail. And today, 3 or 4 different programs later, we've realized what a poor outcome that was, because many teachers were not trained adequately to introduce and carry the curriculum as it was envisaged in that system. While we have a fair number of good educators in the country, I believe the new generations of educators do not carry the purpose or commitment and dedication as their yesteryear counterparts did. Discipline, for one, has been diminished by many factors. The removal of corporal punishment, for example, the action of student governing bodies, better known as SGBs in South Africa, and the trade unions, who are largely only interested in their members' welfare primarily, rather than the progress and betterment of education. While we may point fingers, and I've been very critical of the educational department, having had a run-in with the former Minister of Education, Dr. Angie Mocheka. I believe that if we persevere and place education at the top of our pile, then the country and the world will definitely be a better place. My dad was a school principal, and he told me just before I could come on air that he would never have survived in this era of education in South Africa because there's been a radical change. And while we have lived in 2 different worlds, the world of apartheid and the world without, and the world without technology and the world with technology, the aspect of AI is marauding lives, and it will do so to education. I hope not to the detriment of the country and the child. Thank you.
I think we have some more photos, Navin.
Yes, the other photos are actually just depicting the times when the students were protesting. And if it can be just shown, and I could be indicated when it's over. these are the photographs that I just took a few. There are thousands of them, but they depict the brutality that was meted out to the children of 1976. And it's a sad indictment of our times, but unfortunately, like every cruel period in history, we are exposed to these kind of things. And I just hope there will never, never, ever be a repetition of 1976, even though we may want to fight and challenge educational authorities in the future.
Navin, next one.
Yeah. And here again, we see the depiction of 1976. And it's a tearjerker if one has to look at it in the context of it being provided. But not is the photograph off? I can't see it on my screen.
Navin, the next photo.
Okay. Yeah, once again, I just wanted to reflect that these pictures, they say a thousand words can be spoken from a picture, and these are the ones that depict what has happened in 1976. There have been protests subsequent to that, but as a starting point, as a pioneer of the revolution against education in South Africa, these are the pictures that I chose to represent the era. Okay. I'd like to thank you, Dr. Mabir Shalima, for giving me the opportunity to present this little talk to the audience. And if there are questions, we could take them.
Naren, this has been quite an eye-opener, and I really want to thank you for bringing it to our attention. Very, very, there are a few words to describe how I feel right now, having seen everything and having heard what has happened. But I recall your father, and my warm regards to him. I was hoping he would have been here with you so that we could have gotten his insights, having been in the education system at that time. But I want to thank you very much for an informative presentation. And at this point, I'd just like to let our audience know that we would ask you to please hold your questions and hold your comments until all three presenters have spoken. So thank you very much at this point, Naren, and please just hold on for some of those questions that I'm sure will come. Thank you.
Thank you.
To those of you on YouTube, please go ahead and type your messages in the chat box, and we'll have our speakers address those at the end. I want to move on now to our second speaker, and this is Dr. Premlal Rambachan. With nearly 4 decades of experience, he serves as an adjunct academic in the School of Public Administration at the Management College of Southern Africa called Mancosa. Welcome, Dr. Prem.
Well, thank you very much. I'm just moved by the fact that Naren has actually, it was for me a total recall of the memories of what happened on that despicable day that we should never ever come across again in our lives should we live on this planet Earth. It makes people, when I see these pictures, I just, and I'm sure you as well, that the sadness, the pain, and goosebumps just go, onto your body. And Naren, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And it's really, to hear somebody speak with pictures and with visuals like this, I'm trying to see now, what else do I have to tell you in terms of this presentation? But I'm going to do something very different. I'm going to tell you a story. And the story is that, and very truly inspired by my wife more than anything else to tell the story, because we need to say this at the very beginning. And it's a story where many of us, and I kind of looked at the story from a way of conditioning to consciousness. When I looked at this, and you would remember this as South Africans, I think Naren, you would remember this as well, and and the professor, that every morning, exactly the same way, as young school children, we stood in neat rows, voices raised in unison to sing Die Stem van Zuid-Afrika. Watching the three-tiered flag ascend the pole. To a child, it was merely an ingrained habit, a daily ritual of innocence. We did not know then that our voices were being woven into a grand orchestrated design. We were blind to the architecture of apartheid, the calculated policy of separate development. This was quiet, an insidious front of apartheid education, a subversive strategy designed by the national government to police the mind before policing the streets, aiming to keep a nation divided, compliant, and unconscious of its own subjugation. And now when Narendra started, the epicenter, June 16th, and the shattering of silence. Indoctrination has a shelf life. The human spirit does not. As the years unfolded, a profound political and spiritual awakening took root. Through self-realization, shared dialogue amongst friends, and ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, we were all children in school. The veil was lifted. We saw the apparatus of the state for what it was. The tipping point was the June 16th, like Narendra said, 1976. What began in Soweto as a defiant stand by school children against unjust educational policies and compulsory imposition of Afrikaans became the epicenter of a national awakening. It ignited a firestorm of mass mobilization that swept across every corner of South Africa. In solidarity, communities of all backgrounds, including the Indo-South African community, joined the uprising. We stood before and after June 16 in collective action, fully aware of the stakes. We chose defiance over compliance, braving the brutality of apartheid laws because the hunger for dignity far outweighed the fear of the regime. And this is where the right is coming. I look at this as documenting the triumph, the power of the pen. The state
Dr.
possessed.
Prem, you have a PowerPoint. Are you going to show it?
Am I not on the PowerPoint?
No. This is why I was wondering.
Okay, let's see.
I thought you were going extremely well, though. I thought it was the introduction to the PowerPoint.
I thought so too, but then
Would you like us to show that for you? Does Navin have it?
no, only he has it. He tried to send it.
I have it. Just give me a second. Let me.
No problem.
Okay, just give me a second.
He tried to send it to us, but we were not receiving it because the file was too big, and we had some difficulty. And he has a video in it, which Dr. Prem, we didn't test that video. So let's hope it works.
It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
It works. It will work.
Just share your screen.
Yeah, he did it twice.
You'll have
So
to
it
make
should
that
not be.
share audio
Wait,
to
just
the
give me a second. Give me a second. I got. Just give me a second.
You have it, Navin?
You know.
No, I don't have it. But if he has a video in the PowerPoint, he'll have to share audio as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Meanwhile, I was writing some quotes. Conditioning to consciousness. That's what you started talking about.
Yes, yes, I
And
started like that. Yeah.
yeah. And it was interesting that you raised policing the mind before policing the streets.
Yep.
That's something that we have going on in Trinidad today. That might be an exceptional way to speak to it. I also love the fact that you raised that indoctrination has a shelf life, but the human spirit does not.
Dr. Mabir,
Yes.
Dr. Mabir, I'm trying to share my screen with you. I think I did the same thing the last time.
Yeah.
Um,
You did it. We had a little rehearsal and all went well.
Here we go, man. Here we go. Here we go. Sorry. Here we go.
And you
I
tried
think I
twice successfully.
yeah. You know what happened? Naren, what Naren did, Naren actually put me off guard because of the depth as to when he spoke, and I'm thinking to myself, wow.
Oh, it's coming up now. It's coming up.
It's it's just
Right.
something that caught me off guard, and yeah. But are you there now?
Yes. So
there
go
now?
to the
Yes,
slide.
right.
Go to the slide where you stopped.
Here we go. Am I there? Are you there?
That's the first one. So you have to go to
No,
where.
I'm still seeing the slide.
Okay, let's see. No, wait, I'm not finished there yet. Am I there?
Go to where you stopped because you spoke a
Yeah,
good
I'm
while.
going to, yes.
No.
Yes, I'm going to the pen, right? Documenting the triumph, right? The power of the pen.
Yeah.
Kalima, are you there?
Yes. We're watching you.
Okay. All right, sure. So documenting the triumph, the power of the pen. Okay. My apologies for that, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm back on track. Thank you so much for that, Shalima. So the state possessed the armor, right? The courts and the guns, but they could never conquer the human spirit. Decades after the barricades have fallen, a battle to preserve the truth of this cross-cultural solidarity continues through the power of memory and literature. Now, this may be very interesting for you to hear me. In the post-apartheid landscape, prominent Indo-South African educators and authors, like our very good friend Betty Govenden, Ghulam Wayed, Ashwin Desai, Kiru Naidu, have committed their lives to writing the history of this resistance. The work serves as a vital archive, chronicling the historical impact of educational policies and reassuring and ensuring that the narrative of joint struggle, sacrifice, and cultural resilience is never erased. So that was my story in terms of the very beginning. Now the context. The context of the story was it had four very core historical facts. And the one was the catalyst, because the apartheid government mandated that half of the subjects, including mathematics and biology, be taught in Afrikaans. Now you can imagine what that would do and what that did actually. And Naren said it very well, and the pictures depicted a very, a terrible scene where you just have to go back and just think about what had happened at that time. The protest, led by figures like 19-year-old Sisetsi Mashinini, students planned a peaceful mass demonstration. It was very peaceful. There came the brutality. The brutality came in where the police responded with live ammunitions, according to what Naren was also saying, killing 13-year-old Hector Peterson and hundreds of school children. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not want to go more into this because I think this is going to be enough for just one night. But the impact, the uprising drew global outrage, initiated the internal assistance that eventually ended the apartheid regime. And ladies and gentlemen, with that in mind, I want you now to please close your eyes. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to listen to this beautiful man that I'm going to play to you. I want you to close your eyes and listen. It is a video that I'm going to play to you, and you'll be very familiar with this video. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm trying to look where we are. Here we go. Okay, here we go.
We are not getting any audio.
Can Can you hear that, Dr. Kumar?
No, no.
Now I need some assistance here because it was playing all the time.
That's why I say when you share the PowerPoint, you would have had to share audio.
Yes.
When you select that checkbox, when you click share, you have to click share song also.
You mean like that? Yeah.
No, you would have to come off the
Should I come out of here?
PowerPoint and
Yes,
then
you can stop sharing and then share it back.
Stop sharing.
And when you
Okay,
click
so-
share, there's an option
Yeah.
to share sound.
Okay. I'm stop sharing. Stop sharing. Where is this? You said.
When you click share, before you choose the PowerPoint, to the right under share options, you'll see share sound.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
let's check that checkbox and then choose the PowerPoint and click share.
Okay.
Now-
Here we
now
go.
we should-
no audio.
No audio still.
So let's skip it. Let's skip it.
Prem,
Okay.
can you sing it?
You know, I was never born a singer, but you know what? I just want to say that can you see you will never find justice in a world where criminals make the law. Can you see that?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
That is good enough for you. That is good enough for you. But I will try and get that video played maybe before the night's over. But let me continue. Okay, so as we go into lessons to be learned and the key takeaways. So when I look at lessons to be learned and the key takeaways, I'm actually reminded of this early conditioning that many of us went through in terms of when we were children, right? And being in early conditioning, the oppressive systems use daily rituals, anthems, and national symbols in early education to hardwire compliance, creating an unconscious acceptance of injustice from childhood. Now you can imagine when we were looking at those flags being raised, right, and the D-STEM anthem being sung every morning in that assembly, being groomed into our minds, into our heads, right? Then there was the second part of it was the catalyst of awakening. Now I always believe that I told you that indoctrination has a shelf life. Political and spiritual self-realization can break through years of rigid state conditioning, all right? Transforming passive citizens into active agents of change, right? The power of inter-community solidarity. Ladies and gentlemen, this is takeaways that we would take back to our workplaces, our communities. Now, the power of inter-community solidarity, true systemic transformation occurs when localized resistance reaches an epicenter, like June 16, 1976, and ignites cross-cultural unity, such as the joint struggle of the Afro-descendant and the Indo-South African communities against a divided regime. There goes my friend Betty, Ashwin, and Kiru. Literature and memory as active resistance. When regimes hold immediate physical power, authors, educators, and scholars hold the power of legacy. Documenting historical struggles ensures that sacrifice is not erased and that the oppressed write their own history. The inevitable triumph of the human spirit. No matter how heavily a state polices education, laws, and language, or movement, it cannot permanently suppress the innate human drive towards dignity, truth, and freedom. Okay? So, as in my conclusion, I'd like to say that the story of South Africa's history of oppression, it's really it really, for me, it resonates with very closely to what Naresh has said. It is not merely, the story of South Africa is not merely a history of oppression. It is a universal masterclass in the evolution of human consciousness. It proves that while a state can institutionalize division and enforce compliance from childhood, it cannot suppress the innate human drive towards truth and solidarity. For thought leaders across the global diaspora, including the Indo-Caribbean community, this narrative serves as a powerful reminder that education and cultural memory remain our most potent tools to resist subjugation, rewrite history, and ensure the eternal triumph of the human spirit. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, I'd like to say thank you and I apologize for the video. Thank you very much.
Dr. Prem, thank you for a very moving presentation. Another one. Ladies and gentlemen, we really appreciate the first two presentations, but now I want to bring on a lady who is very special to us, Professor Roshni Nadesan. She's a social work educator at the University in Johannesburg. She's well published in social work, particularly in social work education, employment readiness, and readiness for practice. Welcome, Professor Nadesan.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the warm introduction. I'm in awe of our first two speakers, so I'm wondering what am I going to say that's going to be different from what they said. You've heard the story, you've heard the background to the June 16th. So firstly, I want to acknowledge the work of Shamila Mohammed, yourself, and Dr. Kumar Mahabir for your diligence in advocating the voice of Indians globally in varied forms and varied fields of interest. I also want to acknowledge today's fellow presenters. Your stories have been amazing. Your capturing of the days of 1976 and thereafter are so, beautiful, and it personifies what has happened then. It makes us go back and think about what has happened in 1976. So I want to commend you for your commitment to resistance of apartheid strategies that we've been experiencing over the years, till today in its varied forms. So today, my topic is on the interracial narratives of the struggle, why the dominant narrative centered Black South African students, and how that framing affected the documentation and commemoration of Indo-South African contributions to the anti-apartheid resistance. If you look at the background for today's topic, as you've heard, is the dominant narrative of the 1976 Soweto uprising, often commemorated annually on June 16th, and you've heard that June being Youth Month. So the Soweto uprising is one of the most powerful narratives of educational resistance. The narrative that is contained in our history textbooks is that students protested the compulsory use of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction, seeing it as a symbol of oppression. The narrative came to center Black South African students, particularly those in Soweto. Why? Because the uprising began in their schools, in the African schools in Soweto, and that focus also shaped how other communities' participations, including that of Indo-South Africans, were documented, remembered, and commemorated. So South African Indians were not the primary participants in the initial June 1976 protests, but they did play roles in the broader anti-apartheid, in fact, very important roles in the broader anti-apartheid struggle that the uprising energized. We've seen these pictures, we've seen some really sensitive pictures and videos a short while ago, but it's also very important to distinguish the difference between the Soweto uprising itself, which was overwhelmingly led by Black African students protesting conditions in African schools, one of which was the language. It also reflects on the broader anti-apartheid movement in which South Africans and South African Indians played a significant role. Many historians describe 1976 as a catalyst that inspired greater political mobilization amongst young people across South Africa, including the Indian communities. The uprising helped strengthen interracial opposition to apartheid, but it also contributed to the growth of organizations that would become influential in the 1980s struggle against the regime. So 1976 teaches us about mobilization, about storytelling that we've just even heard now, and community agency, or the agency of that community. It wasn't just the children. It was more than just the children.
Professor,
I want to share with you, yes.
Thank you. I wonder if you would like to share your slides.
My apologies. I assumed I was sharing, but I'm going to share it again now. I see we all have a difficulty in sharing slides, so I'm just going to stop share and share again. My apologies for that.
That's all right.
And thank you for telling me about it. I need to end because I'm sharing a slideshow on my side. Can you see the slideshow now?
There we go, yes.
Okay, I'm just going to put this from the beginning and take you down through where I am now. So a few days ago, I had the privilege of actually attending a presentation by this young lady that's on your screen right now. Not really young anymore, because she is actually in her 70s now. But this is Mrs. Sibongile Bongi Mkabela, a social worker who began her journey as a student leader during the 1976 Soweto uprising. So whilst we are very familiar with the picture of Hector Peterson, Sibongile was one of those 11 people convicted at the time for that uprising. So perhaps at this point, one of the things we all are talking about is, where were we at that time? Many of us have a good story to tell of being suspended from school or being expelled from school or missing out a year or missing out even more of those years from schooling. And all of our stories contribute to the greater narrative. Several factors can be looked at in terms of the narrative that centered Black African students. We looked at the immediate, the uprising's origins. The immediate trigger was the apartheid state's language policy in African schools. Iconic symbols, especially the photograph of Hector Peterson, became the backbone for the entire uprising. African students constituted the overwhelming majority of participants and the overwhelming majority of victims. But very importantly, we look at media coverage. International journalists focused on Soweto and the state's violent response there. Global reporting tended to simplify a complex national movement into a more easily understood story: African students versus the apartheid state. So let's look at the Indo-South African involvement in the apartheid resistance. The issue is not that the Indo-South Africans were absent from resistance. Rather, our contributions became secondary in public memory. But many of our students, and names have been mentioned in the presentations today, participated through student organizations, through trade unions, community-based anti-apartheid structures, underground liberation movements, prominent figures that you've heard already, such as Amit Katrada as well, Fatima Mir, Yusuf Dadu, Mac Maharaj, Lenny Naidu, Kumi Naidu, and many, many more are well known amongst historians, but public commemorations have often focused more heavily on African resistant narratives associated with 1976. These individuals that I mentioned were part of a longer tradition of Indian participation in resistance to apartheid, before and after 1976. So in areas with significant Indian populations, including that of what is now Durban and surrounding townships, Indian students and activists responded to the political climate created by the uprising, participated in the broader mobilization against apartheid. During the break or earlier on, we were speaking about where we had studied. And Indian students in South Africa, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal, were relegated to the University of Durban Westville. That's the separatist movement that was held at that time. And that's where our realities actually took place. But if we had to frame the narratives, it would be a question of a competition over who contributed more? I don't think so. Because the centrality of Black African students reflects historical reality. They bore the greatest burden of repression in 1976, and they were the center of the uprising. However, anti-apartheid resistance was not exclusively African and Indian South Africans. Everyone made their significant contributions before, during, and after 1976. So earlier, we also learned about the Black consciousness movement. Shalima, you mentioned the Black consciousness. And this leads to understanding the Black consciousness movement. Black consciousness is not about African people. It is about an African struggle of all people for all people. So we must recognize the central significance of the Soweto student revolt, whilst integrating the experiences of others like the Indian, the colored, and anti-white apartheid activists into a fuller national narrative. So in the context of the 1976 Soweto uprising, framing looks at the way events have been interpreted, presented, remembered by journalists, by historians, politicians, educators, museums, and the public. So a frame is not necessarily false, but it's a perspective that emphasizes certain aspects of an event while giving less attention to others. For instance, the dominant framing of the 1976 uprising, and truthfully, is that Black African students in Soweto led a mass protest against apartheid education, and they were met with state violence, massive, horrific violence. And these students and that whole protest helped transform the struggle against apartheid, and that's the truth. But this framing understands the role of others. It underestimates and understates the role of women, the role of teachers, and the role of community organizations. I mentioned earlier that I was in this presentation by Sibongile Makabela earlier this week, on Friday actually. And she contextualized this whole situation, this framing, being one of those 11 people that had been arrested and convicted for that protest. And she's indicated that it was part of a bigger picture. It wasn't just the children that suddenly got up that morning and said, yes, we're going to protest today. It was a process. It was all the organizations and churches and teachers and women and community organizations that got together for that particular situation that was held on that day. But this framing gives less visibility to many others. It also gives less visibility to all of those other organizations, to the Indo-South Africans, to the colored and white anti-apartheid activists who supported or participated in resistance movements connected to that period. So when we look at why framing matters, we realize the root of the contemporary struggle lies in the institutional engineering of inequality. We listen to narratives from older generations who highlight how education was weaponized to dictate the outcomes based on race. So framing also influences what's taught in schools. Which people become our national heroes? Which museums and what museums and memorials emphasize? what stories are actually recorded in the archives, and how later generations understand the past. So when scholars discuss the framing of the 1976 uprising, they're usually examining how the event has been represented and remembered, whose experiences have been highlighted or overlooked in that process. So let's go into the Indo-South African movement in anti-apartheid resistance during and after the 1976 uprising. We looked at student activism. Indian students, particularly in areas as Durban and surrounding Indian townships, and probably beyond as well, became increasingly involved in student politics and anti-apartheid campaigns. The events of 1976 radicalized many young people across racial groups. If we look at political organizations, Indian activists participated in anti-apartheid organizations that supported resistance to apartheid policies. Many worked alongside African activists in structures linked to the liberation movement. If we look at community mobilization, and some Indian community leaders, teachers, and activists organized meetings, discussions, and campaigns condemning state violence against students and opposing apartheid education policies. And then we also had the underground resistance that we all are very, very familiar with. So reframing has affected documentation. There's an archival imbalance where local community activism was less systematically recorded. We had a simplification of resistance. A powerful national story emerged. Black African youth rose against apartheid and challenged South African history. What basically this means is that there was cross-racial solidarity that this narrative obscured. It obscured joint organization and the interconnected nature of resistance amongst African, Indian, colored, and the white anti-apartheid activists. We need to see the apartheid resistance as an African-led, but also as a multiracial resistance. So if we look very briefly as under education, look at education under apartheid, we've heard that under apartheid, access to quality education and training was highly unequal. Many people acquired valuable skills through work experience rather than formal qualifications. Interracial narratives of educational struggles often focused on the interactions between Black, white, colored, and Indian South Africans, showing how education became a tool of oppression and a site of resistance. If we look at apartheid and unequal education, essentially the apartheid government used strong-arm tactics whereby intimidation was used to promote indoctrination. Black learners received fewer resources, poorly funded schools, and a curriculum designed to prepare them for low-wage labor. White schools received significantly better funding, better facilities, better qualified teachers. Indian and colored schools occupied an intermediate position, receiving more resources than Black schools, but less than white schools. But this created stark racial inequalities that continue to influence South African education today. You may have heard of Frantz Fanon, whose picture is on the screen, who argued that colonial education systems alienated the colonized and enforced inferiority complexes that served to reproduce Eurocentric values. And he advocated the demand for free education, for accessible schooling as an unfulfilled promise of the Freedom Charter. He advocated for a decolonized curricula to challenge the dominance of Western epistemologies in educations of learning. Student movements such as the Fees Must Fall were based on Fanon's philosophies and highlighted ongoing inequalities in access to tertiary education. So if we look at the effects down the line, the educational deprivation experienced by Indians during apartheid had several consequences. We had reduced access to high-quality educational resources, limited professional and economic opportunities for many families, continued inequalities that persist into the democratic era, and the current narratives focus on access to higher education and language policies. But despite these discriminatory policies, significant numbers of Indian South Africans pursued academic achievement and professional careers, often overcoming substantial structural barriers. So earlier, I asked you to locate yourself about where you were at the time. We need to see ourselves differently. Instead of seeing this as a revolution, that was what our history textbooks told us to define that era as. International narratives of educational struggles in South Africa trace a journey from legally enforced racial segregation to ongoing efforts towards equity and inclusion. And the stories which should be told should highlight both conflict and cooperation amongst racial groups. Interestingly, the academic institution where I work has come full circle. From being focused on an elitist and segregated education for then only for the white community, it's joined the struggle institutions in our democratic South Africa. So we need to bridge the gaps of segregated identities. The uprising was not just a Black uprising, but it was an unselfish, selfless act of love for humanity. And this framing leaves space for nuanced accounts of multiracial perspectives. So as I leave this platform, I asked, was 1976 not a call for help? Was this not an enactment of the principle of self-determination? And I conclude that 1976 was just the start. It set the tone for our democracy. I thank you.
Professor Nadesan, an extraordinarily analytical presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take your questions now. And just to remind everyone, please go ahead, raise your electronic hands, which you will find at the base of your screen in the reactions button. And Kumu Gupta has had her hand up before we even invited anyone. Kumu, please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, hi. So it's always amazes me the spirit of, standing up to injustice. That's the way it should be. So my question is that, not that I mean to minimize the education struggle and what happened in Soweto, but a general question is that what was it about the education that caused this kind of uprising and reaction as compared to maybe health or some other areas? Because I'm sure that they were suffering all across the board. So what is it that made this happen in such a violent and such a large scale? Thank you.
Professor Nadesan, would you like to take that one?
Yes, sure. So you're right. Education was just the catalyst. The issue of Afrikaans was just a catalyst. You've heard Naren earlier speak about the segregations. So we had the nationalist government, which was built, structured such that for the white population. Then you had the House of Delegates. So you had the House of Assembly for the whites and the House of Delegates for the Indians and the House of Representatives for the coloreds. And the colored is a combination group, a mixture, which is really is not a nice term to use for persons of that origin. But historically, if we go into history, we'd realize why. But the Black population had the minimal resources, absolute minimal. It was as if, so access to education was just one, but health was they were seen as relegated, and they would receive very little funding for anything, including for health, including services, including their municipal services. So if you look at the general structure of the Group Areas Act, which we did not discuss today, the Group Areas Act relegated people according to how they were classified by the government, and we were classified in those 4 groups. So the Black population were pushed further away from the cities, meant that they had to incur more costs to get into the city to get work, for instance. And then we also, if we talk about work, we had certain structures and spheres that were identified for certain races. So the Black population were not identified for the jobs that the whites received for the Indians and the coloreds. They were always relegated. So it was a huge array of, dissatisfactory or unsatisfactory services that was meted to them. And so education was just the catalyst. It was inevitable that there would be this uprising.
Thank you very much, Professor Nadesan. MK, I know you had your hand up, but let me bring Chats Devru first, please. Professor Chats, please. I know you would want to add. Go ahead, please. Kindly unmute.
I'm not seeing him.
Professor Chats?
Yeah. He is.
You need to unmute your mic, please. Oh, he says he can't unmute.
Okay. Ask someone and I'll attend to him meanwhile.
MK, can you unmute?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
Yes. So,
Can you
okay.
hear me?
So, Professor
you hear
Charles,
me?
we'll come back to you in a minute. Please just keep trying to unmute. Go ahead, please, MK.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much to the presenters for giving such a beautiful background on this catalytic moment in South Africa's history. Having gone to East Africa 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and coming from a family that was also a victim of the Bantu Education Act and the number of bottlenecks that non-whites suffered in South Africa, my problem is a little more difficult than the one we've been able to frame today. The question as I see it today in all the countries where the Indians have settled as an indentured entity, what I would call the indentured Indian diaspora, we have never been counted in the freedom struggle, regardless of what contribution we made. When the moment of freedom came up, it was a struggle of the Black people against colonialism. So the Indians living on a fault line of history were always seen as not part of that history. We were seen as coming on the back of slavery, and the general narrative was, you people had it better than us. You didn't suffer as much as we did. Look, you've got all the cars, you got the houses, you educated yourself, we are still suffering. That's number one. Number two, Mahatma Gandhi's own contribution, unfortunately, is not even fully recognized in India. What Gandhi was able to do is not even today fully comprehended in the struggle for human equality. And the third question is, what about people who went back to India and nobody's ever heard of what happened to them as the indentured? So our whole idea of this is a very fragmented, fractured image. And to quote Salman Rushdie, I'm just reading his Midnight's Children, we are handcuffed to history. I think we need to liberate ourselves in the term of the image we have of our place in this whole structure from the 19th century. I'll just leave it at that. I think there is a much deeper fault line issue that we need to address so that we are not fighting this battle on major events and incidents, but in a much more holistic way.
Thank you, MK. Naren, would you like to respond?
Yeah, no, look, the reality is that whatever happened in 1996 was actually a kind of relay race in the field of human endeavor, in that a baton was passed on to the next generation to take on the fight. Thank God that 1994 happened, and there was a complete change of regime, as we would call it, and it gave rise or birth to the possibility of regenerating human life in South Africa, because apartheid really took away the dignity and reality of people of color. And as Prof earlier indicated, which collaborated with the thing I mentioned about the House of Delegates, House of Representatives, we were compartmentalized. But the one thing I need to add is that the South African Constitution mandates the radical transformation of public basic education. And to that end, the Constitution, read with the South African Schools Act, entrenches a right of equal access to quality basic education for all. And we must note that the substantive approach to equality, rooted in transformative ideology of the Constitution, necessitates an acknowledgement and overcoming of the past patterns of disadvantage based primarily on the grounds of race and socioeconomic class. So whilst we may look at the past, the tragedy of that day, I celebrate the thought that I personally was given a chance to a better education. And, I was, Dr. Ramlachan will know, we were colleagues at the University of Durban, Westville. We just met at Mancosa last year. But he will tell you of the challenges that we faced at the university, which was then regarded as a bush college because it was for Indians specifically. I had the opportunity of also reading for my science degree at the University of Western Cape in the 80s. That was the highlight of my career because it was such a volatile period fighting against the regime to get better education, to change the whole perspective of education. And South Africa, whilst we're not completely transformed yet, but I think in time we might not be alive, but hopefully we'll get there.
Thank you very much. Prem, would you like to add?
Yes, unmute. Oh, chat is available.
Yeah.
Chats.
I'm available now. Thanks.
Yeah. You can turn
Go
on your
ahead,
video if
please.
you wish.
I'm dressed in my pajamas. It's very cold here in
Okay,
Pretoria. So
okay, no problem.
unfortunately, I'm not very properly attired. I know there's many people that would like to speak, so I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. I think there's something that I find. By the way, I thank all three speakers for the eloquence with which they delivered their talk. But one has got to contextualize this in a much more larger movement. And if you look at the 76 riot, which is being discussed by all three speakers, and your topic had actually misled me because I thought we were going to be speaking about apartheid education, and education per se. So the movement of 76, one has got to see it in a context of a growing swell of uprising in the country, which goes back to 1956 already. The Ladies' March in Pretoria had already started, had served as a catalyst for this kind of uprising. And there's a lot that was going on in the scenes. Why 76 is so important for us and for the world at large. It was the first and only uprising that was spearheaded by the youth. All other revolutions in the world and uprisings were started by adults. This was the first movement of its kind that was started by students. And I think that is what's important. And the brutality of the regime at the time was exposed. And that is what's so significant. And what I want to add here is that this entire movement from 76, people always see this as a movement against Afrikaans. The Afrikaans was the straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't just about Afrikaans. It was about Christian national education. And one of your speakers spoke about indoctrination that was there. It was a larger discourse about a rejection of an education system that was impoverishing the majority of citizens in the country. Afrikaans was simply the straw that broke the back. And actually, I just want to correct you one speaker. Students were not only taught in mathematics and biology in Afrikaans. It was a 50-50 thing. They were taught, part were taught in English and part were taught in Afrikaans. And I know this for a fact because I was a student in 1976 at school, and we were taught in English, and this was at the Indian schools. Now, I don't want to go into the identity politics here, of Indian, colored, black, and so on. When I grew up, there was only two classifications. You were either white or you were non-white. That was it. There was no Indian, colored, black. You were just non-white. However, within the non-white group, there was an implicit hierarchy within it. It developed its own hierarchy, and the apartheid system benefited from that. They introduced a tricameral system to further divide this in typical Machiavellian style, to divide the majority of the country. So now, that's the point there. When we look at what happened in 76, we have not seen the end of it. It started in 76, which served as a catalyst, and up till today, and I can say this for somebody teaching at a higher education institution, there isn't a single university in this country that teaches Indian music, which constitutes a small minority of the population, and more importantly, in African music is not taught at any university at a major level. Now you're sitting with 92% of the country's population whose art and culture does not manifest itself in a university curriculum. So what has happened is that from 76 up until now, there's very little that has actually changed. The colonial system we still had is still retained in its structure and its form. So in other words, the form that we are dealing with is still there. The content may have changed occasionally, but the form is there. And I think when we're talking about apartheid education, we hear some of our politicians talking about this. Yes, we haven't cast off our shackles of the apartheid. Yes, it's still there. My question is, what have we done since 1994 to change that? What have we done? What has my generation done to make that turn? We can always sit and reminisce about 76 and talk about the remnants of apartheid, and we can quote Fanon, and we can quote Achille Mbembe, and a whole lot of them. The question we need to ask ourselves in the country, what have we done to move this forward? Because the student protest of 2015, the fees protest, the fees must fall, the roads must fall, they are all part of an extended long tail that started in 76. And I just wanted to put that out there. I've spoken too much already, so I'm going to stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for raising that. Dr. Prem, would you like to respond?
Yeah.
You're unmuted. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. I think with Professor Chatz, it is so inspiring to hear you speak the way you speak, because I think during that period of the Durban Westphal strikes with students, I think you were in the center of everything, and so was Naren and myself and Roshni. But your point is valid, because I think, where are we now after 1994? That's a valid question. And I'm saying that my principal said that the higher education system, the higher education must get off their comfort zones. And that is so important. The higher education is always in their comfort zones. So there's very little or nothing, for me is being done, because when I look at higher education and from the time at UDW, I coined a phrase, a philosophy, which goes like, serve the student, serve the universe. And that philosophy stayed with me, but for some reason, institutions are not going that path, because I believe that student centricity at any institution is the greatest. If you got student centricity, you got students in a campus, you got a campus with no students, there is no campus. And for me, I agree with Prof. Devrup, and there's very little or nothing's being done. Higher education is sitting backwards and just doing the normal admission, registration, teaching and learning, and graduating and going on. There needs to be more that needs to be done. And at the same time, I think curriculums need to change, because certain careers now will become negative. If they're becoming negative, so why can't higher education institutions like the CHE, for example, or the DHET in South Africa, why can't they start thinking about new professional choices? So that would be my take, Shalima. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let's take a question from Mr. David. I believe it's Genda. Would you?
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, can
Go
you hear
ahead,
me?
please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, yes, I'm from Pietermaritzburg, South Africa, and I just wanted to thank the speakers for the presentation that we made. I just want to make a comment, a couple of comments actually, just to add to what Chats is saying about the context. I think if we look at where we were in 1976, it was more than 10 years after the political organizations in South Africa were banned. So the ANC, the predominant freedom movement at that time, was in exile basically. Half of the leadership was in Robben Island, and there was sporadic action in the community through controversies with the armed wing of the ANC and so on. But essentially, the activism was not there as it was in the early 60s, when the leadership was free. And so 1976, the June 1976 uprising was more than just education. And I agree with Chets, because it sparked, it was a trigger for activism to start again. And I think that if you look at the way things progress from 1976, 10 years later, 9 years later, we had the formation of the United Democratic Front. The organization was still banned, but there were community organizations, religious organizations, and so on that got together as a formation against apartheid. So I wanted to say that firstly. Secondly, I think our visitors, at least our participants from around the world, need to know this fact that under apartheid, there was I think one of the speakers mentioned this, but there was a different system of funding for education, for example. If you take what happened in the 80s, I stand to be corrected, but there was per child, there was 4,000 Rand for a white child for education. There was 265 Rand for an African child. And in between were Indian and Indian and colored, which was, I think, about 1,900 and some odd Rand. So that was the actual disparity in terms of what was provided for education. The African population, of course, was much more. If you take where I come from in Pietermaritzburg, our population is like, now it's about 680,000. Of that, only 60,000 are Indians. And yet the money that was spent for Indian education per capita was far more than what the African kids were getting in terms of their situation in the township. And I think that I think it was the first speaker who mentioned, that 30 years down the line, what have we actually achieved? And I think that, that is the context in which where we started from. In 1994, after our freedom, when the transformation and unification started to happen, I think there was a merging of 18 departments of education from around the country. All these little homelands, the white education, Indian education, and so on. There were about 18 different departments of education that had to be brought into one structure. And that structure had to now manage education throughout the country. And that's where we started from, this disparity about the resources that were being spent in the township schools in terms of buildings, other resources, educators, and so on, training. And we still haven't caught up yet. So it's a moving target in the way things have happened. And I must say this, that if the House of Delegates, which was part of this tricameral system in the 1980s, one thing that they did was to spend the budget that they had. And so they built the schools. It's ludicrous that we were so many schools for such a small population. You know, if you take where I come from in Northdale, in a space of 1 kilometer, there were 3 primary schools, simply because they had the money for this thing and they built it. Whereas in the township, I mean, children had to walk 5 kilometers to get to a school. And then you got 60 children in a class. You know, so those are the kind of disparities that have happened through the years, and we haven't got there yet in order to unify education the way it was. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing those insights. Professor Varoshni, would you like to respond?
So I think, you know, both the speakers were quite very, very correct in the way they've summarized the education system. Earlier, I was asked about the what made education in 1976 the catalyst, and I think I was just reminded now about the 1956 march to Union Buildings on the 9th of August, and that was to protest against the Dompas, the pass book that people had to carry around with them. We're seeing a little bit about that in reverse at the moment in our country. But at that time, these are all of the factors that have contributed. I think our speakers have captured the education system very well, and particularly about the funding and the discrepancies as well. So I think there's not much more to add. I think they've done it very nicely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have Ranbir waiting. Ranbir, go ahead, please. Can you unmute your mic?
Sorry, I wouldn't unmute. I do apologize. Great presentation, as always, in these things. A few comments to make. One on what Dr. Keshavji said about Indian contribution. I think people forget about the Cater Manor riots that took place, where Zulus were cheered on by whites to attack and rape and kill Indians. Just as apartheid was forming. The idea again has been reiterated in the song Amandia and by Julius Malema's comments about Indians benefiting under apartheid, which is a bit of distortion. It was mentioned about the whites who had done a lot of work against apartheid, and of course that is true. We have to remember Black Sash movement, who were against the coloureds being disenfranchised. And also Helen Suzman, who sat for 13 years in Parliament, the sole voice against apartheid. The question I want to ask is, this Soweto massacre took place under John Vorster, who ironically was too liberal for people like Herzog and Jacques Moraes, who formed the HNP. So Vorster did make some tentative reforms to keep apartheid alive, and both did some more. Now, if Vaught hadn't been stabbed in Parliament or had survived the assassination attempt, what would we have seen? Would we have seen Soweto massacres on a wider scale? Because there would have been even less reforms, or actually no reforms.
Interesting. It's open. Naren?
Look, and I just want to make a point with what Mr. Gengan made, and it's an important point with regards to the Christian national education. Whilst 1976 was primarily with regards to Afrikaans, it was based on an anti-movement against the Christian national education that was foisted down upon the rest of the country by the apartheid or nationalist government. But would we have more 1976s had 1976 not happened? We could have. You know, it was a whole process that manifested itself in the whole plethora of factors that influenced South Africa. For example, the struggle, you know, for freedom and democracy, which was primarily the reason why things didn't change. And that what Prof mentioned, that 1956 march, you know, I think it was the Black Sash woman who marched to Parliament, and it was the famous thing: you touch a woman, you touch a rock, or you strike a woman, you strike a rock, and which was part of the whole process of revitalization towards 1994. You know, everything built up to it. So the aspect of 1976, while it remains the pivotal date on which we referred this whole talk about, would have played a bigger role if it didn't happen, because the protests, the actions taken by students would have been hectic. I mean, I was a student at the University of Western Cape at the time when we were protesting against the House of Delegates and the House of Representatives, because we felt that they were sellouts, as we use the term. But it manifested itself in the whole revitalization of education in the long term. The sad indictment of the fight of 76 and subsequent to that is that today our education system isn't producing what we were promised, and it's actually, in my opinion, going down. Just before I log off on this one, there was a question asked that, hello, the issue as I understand it in 1976 is due to Afrikaans being introduced in schools, yet in 2026 it is still a compulsory subject in schools. Why? Afrikaans became part of the agenda in the rationalization at CODESA, which was the Congress of a Democratic South Africa, the event that led up to 1994. And because there was a compromise reached, Afrikaans became manifested as one of the compulsory educational subjects, and it is one of our official languages in South Africa. So that's my answer to that question. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Varan, go ahead with your question, please. Can you unmute your mic?
Hi, everybody. A lot of my statements would have has already been answered by the past few presenters. However, I'll explain it in a very short way, a little differently, which was the first question asked. In order to understand why Afrikaans is a big issue, Indians originally all came to Natal. Natal is predominantly Indian, and it was the last British colony, thereby we all having a English/British accent. The rest of South Africa was mainly Afrikaans speaking. As a result, all the blacks living in those places, the Zulus were there predominantly in Natal. The rest of the blacks were given an option to study either in English or Afrikaans, 50% each. But because the people there in all these other provinces spoke Afrikaans, the teachers taught mainly in Afrikaans. Now, can you imagine we as Indians from Durban who learned Afrikaans only as a language, thereby having to learn science, math, accounting in Afrikaans? That would have killed us. Well, that really struck a bad chord in the rest of South Africa. The blacks protested against that. The education was designed to keep them down. I don't think anyone mentioned that the quality of education that was given to the blacks was far less, was inferior to those received that the Indians, coloreds, and even whites received. So as a result, to me, growing up 15-year-old in 76, that was the catalyst, that was the main reason the blacks protested. It was just impossible to study those languages in Afrikaans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kumu, go ahead with your comment, please. Or question.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, Prime Minister Modi, he's a very good negotiator, a very good diplomat, and he travels all over the world asking for things for the Indian people in India as well as outside India. So has there been any effort to make him a part of this fight, or, to get rights and benefits for the Indian diaspora in these countries like the Caribbean and, things like that? Thank you.
Well, we'll have to hear from someone on the ground. Professor Varoshni, would you like to take this one? Followed by Dr. Prem and then by Naren.
I was hoping that you would skip me on this question because it would be difficult for me to comment on Prime Minister Modi's strategy. But maybe, I think rather if the question came, how would we ask for Gandhiji, for instance, to have taken the struggle up? We already know that. And that we would possibly invite. But I really cannot understand how we would then ask Narendra Modi for assistance. But perhaps there's a way, and maybe someone has an answer to that.
Thank you. Dr. Prem.
Yeah, I think that's a valid question where you engage Professor Modi, because the BRICS consortium has in it the 5 different countries of South Africa, India, Brazil, Russia, and China in its consortium, and I'm sure at that level there's always a reach out to Professor Modi and the way he works with the strategy within his own country. And I'm also aware that he's the only prime minister or president in the world that has opened up his doors to students of universities and came down to their level and told them and taught them about AI. So for me, I think on LinkedIn, he actually shared that information together with students of a university. And I said, which prime minister or president does this in any world? I haven't seen any president or prime minister do that. And for me, that was a first. And I actually wrote a letter to his officers and I said, you know what? I wish all prime ministers and presidents were so open and transparent in terms of touching base with the very core of the country, and that is the students. So yes, the BRICS consortium is a way to address some of these issues that we are talking about. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Narend?
Yeah, look, the idea of getting Mr. Narendra Modi involved has its limitations, or pros and cons, as we may call it. The one thing is, I would rather like to have education depoliticized in many ways, because once, not that it can be, but to minimize it, let me put it that way, because at the end of the day, especially in South Africa, if we take the South African context, the more we have investment of politics and politicians, as we have had in the past, the lesser the outcomes or learning outcomes that has happened. But the reality is that we live in 2 worlds, as I mentioned, the new order and the old order. When I was in school, I never imagined the internet. I never imagined AI. Now that it is a reality, one can only imagine, had the kids of 1976 had access to that, what a different world we all would have been living in. But unfortunately, that's moot now. But I don't know, it's a neither here nor there answer to whether Narendra Modi is going to make a big difference. But as Dr. Ramlachan said, the BRICS consortium that has been created can play a role within these countries that, and noting that India and China and Russia are emerging as superpowers. Who knows, the education system might manifest to greater levels with more indulgence from the leaders of those countries as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see Mr. Gengan has his hand up again. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just want to comment on that particular question of Modi. I think that we are a democracy now in South Africa. We've got equal opportunities in terms of the law. Resources are still disparate. The fact of the matter is that the Indian population is not suppressed in terms of education and its institutions. And in fact, if you take former Indian schools that were in the Indian areas, those schools are populated by a majority of African children. The Indian parents largely are sending their children to those Model C schools that Naren was talking about, which are better resourced and so on. But those former Indian schools still have more resources and better systems than the ones in the township. That is the reason why African parents will pay 4 combi fares to get their child to a school in the former Indian area, because those schools are still being taught by Indian teachers or teachers of Indian origin. So I think to expect a foreign power to come into this situation where we already are democracy, I don't think that's on, really. We know what the answers are. Our government needs to put more resources towards building new schools, towards opening up training colleges so that teachers are better equipped and better trained, and to provide equal resources across the board. Those are the answers. Unfortunately, government, as we know, has got all these issues in terms of how the pie is actually divided in terms of funding. But education is the key, and that is what we must put pressure on the government to do, is to move more resources into providing for education. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I just want to read a few comments that I'm seeing in the chat, and it would be remiss of us to overlook these. I may not get all, but this one resonated. Pravin Arjun says, in 1976, I was 10 years old, but I clearly remember the Soweto uprising. However, post-1976, I went to the University of Durban, Westville, where we were actively involved in the apartheid struggle. I was with Kumi Naidu, Kovan Naidu, Abin Badal, and others. These colleagues of mine were often arrested and retained without trial for lengthy periods of time, and also wrote their exams whilst in custody and whilst being tortured in custody. We also have off of YouTube. This person did not identify him or herself by name. However, this is the comment. I went through the education system in South Africa and fought many battles. I had to attend 5 different schools and travel far in order to complete my schooling. I finished matric in 1982 with distinctions. In spite of getting distinctions, I had battles to get a place at the UDW. I had to get my own funds and battle to cope as there was no support and advice. I had to drop out and work. And from 1984, I worked and did night studies for many years until I obtained my degrees with an ultimate of getting my PhD. I have over the years lectured at many institutions and have helped many students. Dr. Ramlachan, this person is saying he met you at UDW many years ago and met again when he or she lectured at Mancosa. We did not have proper sport fields and had to use fields with limited resources. We used to protest and boycott the system. And so this person identifies with many aspects that you all spoke about. Interesting. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, okay, so Miriam has her hand up. Miriam, welcome.
Thank you so much. I just go back to the question that Professor Devrup has raised, and I think it stays in our midst. What has happened since 1976? I think if we go back to the history of education, and specifically Indian education, the same problems that we started with, the quality of education, the overcrowding, the lack of properly qualified teachers or educators, as we call them now, have come back in our midst. We are with much the same problems now, overcrowding, looking for well-qualified teachers in educators in schools, and hardly are we bridging the literacy divide. We do have in our midst the digital divide. Yes, AI is wonderful, and all the problems right now, it is new in the lives of people, but there are problems that are already being addressed. I do not want to go into it. It's a separate topic by itself. Suffice to say that cultural erasure, particularly for the Indo-South Africans, continues to be in our midst. And as Professor Devrupa has correctly pointed out, that there's yet an institution that has included the rich cultural heritage and legacy that the Indians have, absorbed it to make it available. It is still being done privately, religious institutions and religious education and all that. It's just a kind of a segregation is the word that I would come up with even now, unfortunately, sadly. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Mariam. I saw Professor Chats with his hand up. I'm not too sure if he was agreeing with you or if he wanted to speak.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to actually thank Miriam for the comment. I think what I just wanted to add was just to support what David had said. You know, we have all of the resources to make it successful in South Africa. You know, the resources are there. You know, we can deal with the unions, etc. And I think the one reality we as, I don't like using this term, Indian South Africans need to accept that we are a minority in the country. We need to recognize that. You are a minority, and we are given the freedom by the majority to transact your minority state. It's not being suppressed. It's not being written out. Yes, despite what certain political factions the noises they might be making, nobody has written it out. We are allowed to transact our culture, our language, our art, our music. We are allowed to do that. There is no restriction in our system that says you can't do this. There's no such thing. The onus lies on us. If I want to learn Bollywood music, then go ahead and devise a Bollywood music short learning program and teach it. The government is not going to stop you from doing that. The one acknowledgement we do need to make, however, is that we are a minority in the country, and we need to do that. And we can't overstep, what shall I say, our transactability in this majority. So we need to be mindful. And the resources that we have, as David pointed out justifiably, our school resources, those things that we benefited from apartheid, we should really open that up to engage, to allow the other communities to come on board and see what we've done. And if the Indian education system was good, I know it was good. I had the best teachers in the world, I can tell you that. It was an apartheid system. I thank those teachers that I had. It was the height of apartheid. We have very good teachers. Use them within the system, empower them to bring about this change and get rid of the unions that are messing things up. They are the destruction of the education system at the moment. We need to place that on the. I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you very much for this platform, Shalima. I appreciate it.
Thank you for that. At this point, I just want to that point that Miriam made about cultural erasure is not sitting very well with me. And I want to ask Dr. Shardanan Harinandan Singh, the founder of soon to be the academic discipline of grammatology. Baba, can you please comment here? Given all that we've heard thus far,
Thank you.
can you
Thank
please
very
comment
much.
here
And,
about
it is
how
an,
grammatology can be
thank you.
utilized
Oh my
to
God.
prevent this cultural erasure and perhaps assist?
Thank you, Shalima ma'am, Dr. Kumar Mahabir, and all the speakers. It is a very important lesson for us. The last speaker, I sent some likes. I think we are not only in the minority, we are making ourselves, we are marginalization. We accept what we are. And to empower, these are words to be know what means that. My first question is framing the narratives of all the speakers. From the grammatology, we have a capital selector and we have formulated many, many words to use them consequently. I have listened today, and my question is, Are you in South Africa Indian Africans or are you African Indians? This is a very important question. It is not only in South Africa, it is all colonized countries with Girmitia Pass. When you are keeping talk, you are an Indian. You know, the other ethnic group, they do not accept you as a citizen of Africa, of Suriname, of Trinidad and Tobago. At first, we have to mention who are we. Let me tell you this, I am not an Indian. I have an Indian naturality. You, me, and that is bonding us. So my question is, why we and now you in South Africa are using these two words, Indian African or African Indians? Can someone explain this to me?
Well, there is a comment in the chat that they refer to as Indian South Africans.
What? Pardon?
Indian South Africans. Indian South Africans.
Exactly, we are South African and our identity is Indian. And when you are going to call yourself we are Indians, we are formally we are not Indians. About Modi, Prime Minister Modi, I can tell you, I am many times in India and I'm working together with a lot of universities in India. And what I know is that Prime Minister Modi has a policy, you know, and when he is maybe in Trinidad, Tobago, etc., he will say, okay, we are going to create opportunity that you can reconnect with your ancestral village. But there is no infrastructure. There are a lot of things that the government of Modi is telling, but implementation of this, we have to fight for this. About genealogy, you know, and I see maybe I can mention Chalima ma'am and Dr. Kumar Mahavir are for a long time members. And maybe this is news. Tomorrow, no, it is the next day, 22. I am going to, we have a deed, making a foundation. This foundation is focused on the global Girmitia communities. We are not talking about Indian diaspora. This is too long, too large. At first, who are we? We have our own nationality and our length of birth, you know, but we have our own naturality, and that is the umbrella is covering of this. Oh, my opinion is we have to come together because who is doing better? I know who is doing better than the other. These kinds of things we have to forget. Apartheid, as you know, it is a Dutch word. It is created by the north part of the Netherlands. And apartheid means keep them separated. When Gandhi was there, he was also discriminated. He has seen what are the problems. Let me tell you this. The moment when India became independent, the same Mahatma Gandhi ji and Jawaharlal Nehru and the government in that time, they have not mentioned the indentured laborers. Why not? They leave them where they are. They did not give them the Indian nationality. So we had no other choice to accept our own nationality. So we have to be aware. Who are we? You know, and because of this, we have now, and these two persons, We have at Jawaharlal Nehru University in September an international conference about climatology, just to scoping this, what is going on in the world. As you see, the past is hurting you today. We have to look to the past. What can we do today for the future? And it is a lot to do. And I hope that you all, scholars, can come together to create curricula. Oh my God, there is a lot to do. Thank you very much for inviting me today. I am a little bit sick that I cannot talk too long. But my question is not answered. Who are you? And Kumar Mahabir said we are South African Indians, or you said we are Indian South African. I think the last one you said, okay?
Yeah.
Dr. Kumar Mahabir, and that's correct, I think.
Yes, yes.
And then you have to fight for your right because you are a citizen of South Africa, not an Indian. Excuse me. There you go.
Thank you very much for that, Baba. Professor Boroshni, would you like to say something?
No, I was just agreeing with that question earlier on. I always identify myself as a South African of Indian descent. When I go to India, believe me, there's huge difference in what I'm practicing in South Africa. I look the same. I look very much like my ancestors, but there's this huge barrier. So I'm a South African of Indian descent.
Acknowledged. Thank you very much for that. Prem, is there anything you'd like to add?
Shalima, I want to take my leave, but before I go, and this is probably a side deflection, to announce to all the participants present today, there's a movie that's going to be released in 2-3 weeks' time called The Sugarcane Boy. It's a movie directed by Rubendra Govender, and it's a total South African production, taking us back to the 70s, which touches on some of our educational aspects. And while I take part in the role in a cameo role, but I'm sure it will be a major part when Hollywood and Bollywood looks at my role. But that's just a little joke. But just to encourage everybody, if they get an opportunity to go view the movie, please do. It will be available at all cinemas. This is just a little advert that I had to put for the movie. But thanks to everybody. Thanks to Professor. Thanks to Dr. Ramlatan. And thanks to everybody for allowing me the opportunity to air my views and give my opinion on this matter. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that Eubulus Timothy is involved. That's his movie, correct?
No. He's not involved in this movie. This is a total different production by Rubendra Govender. And Eubulus is not involved at all in this movie. It's another movie, completely with a different title as well. This movie is based on a best-selling novel called The Sugarcane Boy. That's a prescribed book in set work in high schools as well.
Nice. Thank you very much
Thank you,
for that.
Diane.
And thank you very much for being here with us. We are closing the program now. I just want to get Dr. Ramlatan to give us his, to give us his final closing comments.
I'm thinking that the comment made by Varushni, where she says that we are South African of Indian descent, that is the correct term, because that's the way we are looked at and identified. I also wanted to make a request that the video that I was supposed to send by Bob Marley, I think you do, in terms of time, could you be so kind and send that video to all the participants and the speakers that were on the chat tonight? Because I think when we talked about a lot of things here, Bob Marley, you'll never know, might have at least the answer. You'll never find justice in a world where criminals make the law. It is a very important and very, tactful way that he's saying this. And he only lived for 32 years on this planet, and he's not far from you, Shalima. in terms of the way he stayed. But I just wanted to make that request to you, if possible. And I also, while I have the floor, to thank each one of you for your time and your precious time in terms of course, the Honorable Dr. Kumar Mahabir. Thank you, sir. The moderator, Shalima Mohammed. Thank you so much for your encouragement always, and also to the speakers. Thank you guys so much, and for the knowledge that we've gained from the people that actually made comments here is actually also something that we will take back to our workspaces. Thank you so much, and God bless.
Wonderful. Thank you. It was a pleasure having you all. Dr. Mahabir.
Yes, I have long proposed that we use the term multiple identities. This is where you are African, you are Indian, you are Muslim, you are Hindu, they are all interconnected and inseparable, inseparably. So there is no, you cannot put one above the other, right? They are interconnected. So multiple identities. You use a particular identity in a particular situation to negotiate sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank all of you all for being here and for contributing in the way that you have. I want us to remember those persons who would have lost their lives in Soweto so that we can actually engage with persons who have become educated at the highest levels and can now make a contribution, not just on the topic, but to their societies, and their multiple identities, hopefully, should make a difference to those to come later on. At this point, and again, I want to say thank you very much to all of our speakers. Thank you for taking the time. Ashley will back this up. But before we go, we want to share with you all just a small commemoration to celebrate a few things. One, the fact that all of us have been through the difficulties that we have, but nothing in comparison to those of our ancestors. And one of the things that they left us with is our culture. And part of that we celebrate today in Yoga Day. I don't know that any indentured immigrant, any indentured servant would have been doing yoga. But maybe they didn't need to because they were doing so much hard work, whereas we are here sitting. So Navin, can you please share that clip so that we can end today on a nice note?
Laugh for health. Laugh for healing. It's about time we let go and laugh more. Now, there was a time I looked for something or someone to make me laugh. But when I depended on those external factors, I went days without laughing until I found laughter yoga. Laughter yoga gave me a safe space to connect with others and laugh. And I was so impassioned by it that I became a laughter teacher. I'm going to invite you now in this session of laughter yoga. I want you all to stand in your glory. All right, now I have to say something. When we start laughing, it always feels slightly uncomfortable. So, to help us with that, I want you to do this. What you're doing right now is shooing away all the judges that sit on your shoulders day in and day out judging you. They're gone. The next thing we're gonna do, take your hands, spread them wide, and let's go with the feet. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Ho, ho, ha, ha, ha. 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 Very good. All right, let's bring it back. Are your hands tingling? We're alive. All right. Now, we have a saying in laughter yoga. Fake it till you make it. But even if you don't make it, it doesn't matter because science proves that regardless of whether the laughter is real or fake, the body makes no distinction. So when you engage in this action called laughter, the body follows suit and you start feeling the emotion connected to laughter. This is how we actually help decrease the cortisol in our body and increase endorphins. So let's do it. Now, we got to get out of our heads. So we're going to do this laughter exercise called the brainwash. So follow me. Put your hands like this, and we're going to unzip with a sound. Going to open it up. Take your brains. You see it? And now wash. Very good. Okay, let's do another one. We got to get into the nooks and cranny of the brain, so we got something called the mental floss. So you're going to take your floss and put it over your heads, and guess what? Start flossing. Are so important and so powerful. We're going to catch our breath. We're going to take a deep breath in, and we are going to say, I am strong. I am strong. Exhale. I am healthy. Inhale. I am strong. Exhale. I am healthy. And one more time. I am strong, and I am healthy. Bring it together, hands on the heart. Thank you.
Just a bit of therapy. Sometimes we need it. Thank you all so much. Ashley?
I mean, considering the topic we had today, we definitely needed to laugh about that one. Not really much to say today. I remember learning about this in UAE, just briefly, but I actually have no words. But all of a bit of a learning lesson, and like I said, I've learned about this in UAE, so nothing much to say on it except we went through a very tough time during the 1970s. But the 1970s has to be remembered also for a time that we pushed back because it was all about Black Power movement, and then we go into the apartheid system. So it was a win and a loss because we were trying to fight for recognition, and this was happening throughout the world. So where I always say where there's a negative, there is a positive to everything. Because of apartheid now, there is not a lot of, racism and segregation and all of that taking place. And the same thing happened here with Black Power movement as well. We were all fighting for recognition. So with every negative, there is a positive, and there came a good outcome of it today. And now our generation can enjoy all of the benefits, particularly my generation, and the upcoming generation. But because of the sacrifices that you all did, that they did, we can now benefit from it. So to that, my generation, to yours, I say thank you. And with that thanks being said, I would like to thank Shalima for being a great moderator as always. Thank you all for taking the time to attend and participate, and to all of you engaging in our conversation today. Thank you. As was said earlier, this public meeting is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. Feel free to contact the ICC to publish your books. Remember that we are asking you to kindly give us your suggestions. If you give a donation, your name will be placed on our poster and all promotional materials. Please contact Dr. Mahabir for details. Our topic next Sunday will be non-Indian researchers on Indian indentureship and its legacies. Please be there. Thanks to our planning team led by Dr. Kumar Mahabir and Shalima Mohammed. Thanks to our IT consultants Navin Mangal and Daryl Grantham. And thanks to Daryl again for designing the poster. Please visit, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and see all our past recordings. I am Ashley Sinanan from Trinidad and Tobago saying Dhanyavad. Thank you and good night.